Welcome to another episode of Altitude Shift, the podcast where I explore how to show up at work with greater executive presence, personal authority, and emotional steadiness. I'm your host, Chris Verlet, and today I am going to talk about how to get better at small talk. I know some of you are thinking, ugh, I hate it, it's fake, it's pointless, it's too awkward, and I get that. Especially if you're someone who's introverted or impatient, it can seem like you're wasting a lot of breath and you'll probably rather spend your time talking about things that are deep and meaningful. And I wholeheartedly disagree, because small talk is not supposed to be meaningless chatter. It's actually one of the quickest ways to build trust, warmth, and credibility if you know how to do it properly. And in leadership and in business and in life, those first 30 or 60 seconds of greeting someone and building rapport, it will set the tone for everything else that follows in that conversation and even beyond. So in this episode, I want to help you reframe what small talk actually is, why it matters more than you think, and how to make it feel and sound more natural, human, and even somewhat enjoyable. Let me start by explaining what small talk is supposed to be. A lot of people see it as mostly awkward chit-chat about the weather or someone asking about your weekend when they clearly couldn't care less. And I agree, that's usually not particularly effective small talk. It's more like social autopilot. It's perfectly harmless, especially if you're simply bumping into someone in the corridor, but other than going through the motions, it's not really going to add any value to the relationship. Good small talk has a purpose. It's a short, low-stakes conversation that's designed to create psychological ease before, between, or after topics of substance. That is the definition of small talk. And this intention to create psychological ease is super important. You can consider small talk as an emotional warm-up conversation. It tells the other person, look at me, I'm calm, I'm attentive, I'm safe to engage with. At the same time, our brains use that warm-up conversation to scan the other person for their tone, their pacing, and their presence. If what we pick up from each other is warmth and curiosity, then we'll both relax and we can start to engage a little bit more deeply. But if we fail to do that properly, then the conversation will feel cold and very transactional. Especially at work, that's a big deal. Because that first impression, how you greet someone, how empathic you come across, and how you connect on an emotional level, it sets the temperature for the rest of the interaction. So, if you want to build or maintain trust, you always need to start by making the other person feel at ease, rather than getting straight to the point. Consider small talk, even if it's just one simple question like, how are things, as the emotional handshake that comes before the start of any real exchange of information. Of course, even if you're fully on board with the purpose of small talk, that's not to say it's always easy. I've trained myself to become very good at small talk, but it still makes me nervous. And in reality, I think most people still get a little nervous about it. You know, you walk into a room full of strangers, or you've arrived early in a Zoom call and it's just you and a few others, or you're being escorted by the hiring manager on your way to the interview room, and suddenly your brain goes into overdrive. You know how to speak, you just don't remember how to sound like yourself with this stranger, with this semi-stranger. And that spike in tension that you're feeling, that's pure biology. That's your body has decided this is an important moment and I'm going to shift into stress mode. And once you've entered that fight, flight, freeze mode, your first goal should always be to steady your nerves. Before you even say a word, take a very short, intentional pause for yourself. Let out one slow exhale, or a few of them if you have the time. Drop your shoulders. Feel your feet touching the floor. Allow your eyes to wander around a bit. Really lean into every single one of your 5 senses to get out of your head and use those few seconds to tell your body, I'm safe here. And when you reach that sense of calm, people around you sense it too, because it's contagious. When you're settled, everyone else can settle too. But even once you've found your calm, small talk can still feel awkward. And that's usually because of a few subtle bad habits that get into the way. So, I'm going to talk about some of the most common ways people trip themselves up when it comes to small talk and what to do about it. The first and most obvious mistake people make is that they're overthinking it. You start a conversation and your brain kicks in. Ooh, what should I say next? Do I sound interesting? Am I coming across as too casual? Can they smell the chicken tandoori on my breath? And suddenly, rather than feeling that you're connecting with this other person, it feels more like you're putting on a performance and you feel hyper self-conscious. When you feel that happening, as I said earlier, my advice is to always shift your focus outwards. Instead of seeking to manage the impression you're trying to make on the other person, start to focus on the impression they are making on you instead. Notice the tone of voice they're using, how they're pacing their words, how animated their facial expressions are. Paint a picture in your head about what it is exactly they're saying. Seriously, imagine it like it's a movie that they're projecting onto you. Because the moment you become more curious about what's happening outside of you, you'll become less conscious about what's happening inside of you. And that's how you put a stop to the overthinking and you start to act more naturally in the conversation. The second kind of struggle happens when people don't read the room well or fast enough, especially in meetings. What I mean by reading the room is getting good at picking up some of the informal signals, or the vibe as the kids say. And again, this is about turning your attention outwards. When you enter a meeting, notice if the room feels quiet. Does it feel lively? Does it feel tense? And this might take you a minute or so, but once you got a clear sense of the temperature, whatever small talk you then start to engage in, try to match the mood of the room slightly below before you try to then lift it. And what I mean by that is you meet people where they are at. If you're in a fantastic mood, you don't barge in with more energy than the room can handle. Only once the conversation's settled, you try and lift it a notch, giving it a bit of extra warmth if you need to. And that kind of emotional calibration, it tells people, often unconsciously, this person gets it. You're demonstrating emotional and social intelligence, and that makes other people feel at ease around you. A third mistake people often make with small talk is that they can't get out of it. You engage in a bit of small talk with someone and suddenly you're stuck. You've covered half a dozen of random topics, both of you can feel the energy dipping, but neither of you really knows where to take the conversation next, or you feel too polite to end it. A great way to demonstrate professional gravitas and authority is knowing how to guide a conversation. Not by dominating it, but by pivoting towards something a little more meaningful. It's knowing when small talk has done its job and it's time to take things a little further. For example, in a business meeting, after a few minutes of light chatter, you might say, it sounds like everyone's had a full week already. Shall we look at what's next for the project? Or in a networking setting, you might start with, what brought you here tonight? And once they respond, you follow with, that's interesting. What kind of work are you doing in that space? It's relaxed and you're being warm, but you're also focusing the conversation towards something a bit more meaningful. And being able to make that kind of transition signals real confidence. And speaking of networking, extricating yourself from a conversation is something I often struggle with, and what I've learned is that the key is to close the loop but without cutting the other person off. You can say something like, hey, it's been great chatting. I'm going to say hello to a few other people before I wrap things up here, but I've really enjoyed our conversation. Let's exchange contact details. It's polite, it's confident, and it signals a sense of purpose rather than a desire to escape. A final pattern I see a lot, especially with newer managers or leaders, is that they are trying to be too professional. When they meet someone senior or someone they really respect, the pressure to prove value or sound competent, it kicks in and they start to fanboy or fangirl. They tighten up and try to dive straight into business, and they skip that emotional and human part entirely. And the irony is that what's meant to signal professionalism, it actually makes them come across as tense and pushy even. Because the other person might just be trying to enjoy their canapé, or they might not be in the mood to talk about work. So to avoid that, you need to relax your timing a little bit. Start with a touch of warmth and curiosity before shifting into business mode. A single line of genuine appreciation is usually enough. Hey, I've really admired your work on X. And then you follow it up with something open like, what's been most interesting about that for you lately? Remember, people who are used to admiration and flattery are likely to be more impressed by your sense of composure than by how much you praise them. So ground yourself, hold your tone, keep it steady, and don't force things. If they don't seem that interested in talking to you, hey, no problem. Smile and close the conversation with grace. Say something like, anyway, I've taken up enough of your time. Really lovely to meet you. And that balance of warmth, respect, and self-awareness is what real professionalism sounds like. And if you want to learn more about that, I really advise you to listen to episode 8 of Altitude Shift, which is all about strategic networking. Now, as I come towards the end of this episode, you may have noticed that the one quality I haven't touched on yet is probably the most important one when it comes to social intelligence, and that's courage. Precisely because so many people dread it, quality small talk usually requires you to go first. To be the one that says hello, to ask a question, to initiate a conversation, even if it risks some kind of awkward pause or a lukewarm response. People are usually quite relieved when someone else starts the conversation because it stops them from having to be courageous. And it does take guts to take the initiative, especially for those of us who are generally a little bit shy or who feel out of place or who worry we've got nothing interesting to say. And yes, sometimes it will fall flat. You'll make what you think is a useful observation and the other person will stare at you like you've just insulted their mother. And that's fine. Be proud that you tried. And the fact that initiating small talk takes courage is exactly why it matters. It's an act of personal leadership in its simplest form. You're choosing to connect even when it feels easier to retreat behind your phone. And by practicing that emotional handshake, you're signaling something much deeper. I'm open, I'm steady, and I'm confident enough to make myself a little bit vulnerable and visible. So, this month, practice that kind of courage. Start a few conversations you might normally avoid. Ask people a few curious questions, even if you don't know where or whether the conversation is going to land. It's not going to turn you into the office chatterbox, but it will make you a lot more approachable, a lot more likable, and increasingly important in the world of business, human. Hey, it's Chris here. If this resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone else who needs to hear it. And if you want more insights on leadership, confidence, and growth, you can hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you soon.